Hey guys, this is Andrew with SHTF Honey Badger, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my favorite way to store my dried goods, and it's not Mylar. What we're going to be talking about today is the Food Saver vacuum sealing attachment that is going to be compatible with mason jars and canning jars that you can find out there. So these attachments come in two sizes. They come in a wide mouth version right here that you can use with your wide mouth mason jars and canning jars, and they come with a regular mouth version, which is this guy right here, that are compatible with your regular mouth canning jars and mason jars. These attachments come in around $25 or so on Amazon, and they come with the accessory tube needed for your Food Savers, which is this gray one right here. Now, I do want to point out this gray accessory tube doesn't work on all Food Savers. If you do have a Food Saver that has a green accessory port instead of a gray one, you do need to buy the green accessory tube, which is a separate item you're going to have to purchase. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this product. I ended up settling on this over Mylar due to a couple different reasons I'm going to outline with you real quick. When I was first looking up ways to store dried goods in bulk, I was looking at Mylar because that is the most common thing you see a lot of preppers use, and I will say Mylar does have some advantages over this option, but overall I liked this option better. The first reason I like this option better is because it allows you to break stuff up more consistently. So you're not sealing stuff into a 25-gallon bag, you're sealing stuff ranging between quart size in most cases to a half-gallon size for your dried goods. I feel this is important to store it in these smaller areas, as it's going to give you more flexibility if you have to break the food up into several locations. It's also going to allow you to keep stuff better protected from each other. If you have all your rice, for example, in a 25-gallon Mylar bag and that bag gets compromised, your entire store of rice is gone. On the other hand, if you're using, say, for example, these quart jars right here, and one of these is broken or one of these gets damaged somehow and the food gets compromised in there, you're only missing a very small portion of your entire supply. So that was one of the things that caught my attention with this, is it kind of forces you to split your food up, but it also makes it easier because you're not having to open larger bags at once. You can just grab one jar at a time and cycle through it. Another item I liked about this is you can open up your containers you're storing your food in, and you can re-vacuum seal them easily. If you're using the Mylar, on the other hand, typically you're using oxygen absorbers, which are a one-time use product. So that's another kind of advantage to this over that Mylar. The third advantage out there that I want to point out, and this was kind of the one that to me was the biggest one, is these are a lot more, have a lot more integrity than looking at a Mylar bag. When it comes to abuse from, say, for example, animals and things like that, you don't have as much risk of a mouse or a squirrel, for example, getting into your food if you're using stuff like mason jars. These are glass and they have metal lids, so you're not going to have to worry about that getting chewed through, versus on the other hand using Mylar. If you're putting it in a Mylar bag, that Mylar bag can get compromised very easily by animals. The Mylar bags can even get compromised too much by moving them around if you have stuff like rice in it, because rice does have a point on the end, and I've seen a lot of people talking about having rice puncture the Mylar bags just in storage. And the other thing too is, even if you're storing those Mylar bags in a bucket, keep in mind it's a plastic bucket. If you have a very determined squirrel or rodent, they are going to get through that bucket. They're not going to get through this glass jar. They can knock it off a shelf and maybe it'll break, but again, it's a smaller amount of food and it's a lot less likely that's going to actually happen. So that's how I ended up settling on this solution. When it comes to your storage time frames, the Food Saver manual itself says that it can help keep food fresh for up to 18 months. From what I've noticed out there doing some more research, these attachments, I would say you're going to be able to keep your food fresh for probably a 5 to 10 year cycle depending on how you're storing it. So if you're storing it in the proper conditions for dried goods, it's a relatively safe bet that you're going to be able to store it for about that 5 to 10 year range. It could definitely last longer, or if you're storing it in a very bad environment, it may not last even those 5 years. But realistically, dried goods have a relatively long shelf life when stored properly, and by putting it in a most zero oxygen environment with the vacuum sealer, it's just going to extend it that much more. So I would say, even with that shorter lifespan, this is going to be that good option, because you should be cycling through it as well. If you're storing away rice, beans, and so forth, pasta, for example, like what we'll show you here in a minute, you should be cycling through it. You always want to cycle through what you have in your pantries, make sure you're using your oldest stuff up, putting fresh stuff in, and I don't think you should be storing stuff that's going to be, consumed 15 years down the road if you can avoid it. So when it comes to that storage time frame, I'm personally not concerned about a shorter time frame because I still think that's a plenty of a shelf life. Now, on how these actually operate, I'm going to show you here by doing a couple different jars using some elbow noodles right here. So pasta like rice is a great item to store in this. It's going to help keep it fresh longer. So we're going to take one of our quart jars here, and this is a wide mouth jar. And I'm going to take one of our attachments here, not attachment per se, but one of our canning devices, which is just a funnel. Drop it in here. I have my bag or my box of noodles already open. And I'm going to pour this into the jar, just using my funnel here. I apologize about the noise. Hopefully this isn't too bad. And you're just going to fill that up close to the top. Shake that out. If you want to throw a little bit more in here, you can. I would leave a little bit of space at the top to make sure it helps seal properly. And then before you put your stuff on to seal this as well, you do want to take a paper towel, just wipe off the lid to make sure there's no little dust particles or anything that got on there from the noodles or from anywhere else. Same thing when you go to put your lid on, wipe it off. One thing I do want to point out as well, these are all sanitized beforehand, so even though these are new jars, you still do want to sanitize them and ensure they're thoroughly dried before you go to put stuff in and seal them. So now that I wiped these off and that we sanitized these all beforehand, I'm going to drop my lid on here. I'm going to take my wide mouth attachment. I'm going to push it on here, and these attachments do have a lip on here, so you push down until that lid seals tight against the lip. You're going to take your attachment hose, snag it into the top, engage your food saver, and this is going to take a few seconds for this to go through. It's going to suck all the air out of this. If it makes you feel more comfortable as well, you can always push down on it as it's sealing. I haven't noticed that to make a difference, but some people seem to say it makes a difference. Again, personally, I haven't noticed it, but it's going to go through its sealing process. This can take anywhere from, I would say, about 10 to 20 seconds, depending on the size of the jar and how much you have in the jar. With stuff like noodles, you're going to have more air in there, so it's going to take a little bit longer to run through its cycle versus something like, say, rice that gets a lot more compacted into the jar. Alright guys, our jar is done sealing. I did cut out the part where the jar actually sealed just because that's going to be way too loud on the microphone. So we can get this cover off of it here that was doing the sealing. We're going to pop our tube out. You want to make sure you do that first, as it's going to release the pressure on this and allow you to get this off of the jar. You can just wiggle this off. Then you're going to take your ring and you're going to screw it onto the jar, and you want to screw these rings on tight when you do the vacuum sealing method, as it'll actually help you keep the seal intact. So it's a little different than doing the hot canning, whether it's like a water bath or pressure canning, where you don't want to keep the ring after you're done. With the vacuum sealing, you do. So you just tighten your ring up tight. You can mark on the jar what you have in here. So you mark your rice, what type of beans and noodles or so forth. And then you're going to mark your date you seal it, and you can just set this aside in your stores now and just use it up accordingly. Again, the thing to keep in mind with this is you can do this over and over and over again. So unlike again with the hot canning, you can reuse these lids to re-vacuum seal the jars after every use. And again, if you're wanting a way to do this without having to have power, you can look into things like a brake bleeder. Those are relatively commonly used with people. You just take a brake bleeder, and you can buy those off Amazon for about 30 bucks. Shove the tip into the top of the jar, put it on here, pressurize it to pull the air out the same way you do with the food saver, and release it, seal it up the same way. So you can use that alternative, or you can use the food saver, but this is the method that I use to store my dried goods. And this is a method I would definitely recommend for most people, and I would say is overall going to be more convenient and more useful than the Mylar. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you have any questions or comments, drop them down below. Most of all though, stay prepared and stay safe.